Welcome to part 3 of Fine Art Photography. This will be the easiest video, I think, for you to watch. This is just some examples of student work that people have done over the years as I've been a teacher for their fine art photography projects. And I'll explain a couple of them. I'll try to explain a little bit about each of them, and hopefully you'll find a few that are inspirational. So this first one is from a class when I was still teaching at the Academy of Art University, and this is an African-American student who made this, I believe it's a Photoshop. I didn't ask her at the time. You're allowed to work in any way you would like to for this fine art photograph. You're not restricted from using software or multiple exposures, but in this case, she photographed these Barbie dolls and made these two pieces that actually represent sociologically and personally her experience as an African-American woman. These are quite interesting. This is also at the Academy of Art University. This photographer is primarily a landscape photographer, and I often had photographers in my fine art classes that really did not see themselves as fine artists at all, and this man did not, and yet he actually really engaged very intellectually in our process. So for this project, he actually took his a landscape photo, a couple of his favorite landscape photos, and he sampled them in Photoshop and divided his images into a specific number of squares, and each square he used one of the pixel samples from that square to depict that image. So this is not a pixelated, but a pixel-driven representative of his landscape photos. I really love these. And by the way, forgive me, this was back in the days when I didn't always get digital files from my students, and so these are pictures of their photos pinned onto the wall, so they're not perfect. This artist actually just included her in a show. She's been in a couple of shows. This was also from the Academy of Art, and she was someone who was a domestic violence survivor. She made a series of these jackets that represented different domestic violence survivors. So the idea was that when you were suffering from the violence, you were wearing the jacket, and then when you took it off, you could actually shed that persona. The inside of the jacket would have the nails heading in, which is depicting that pain, along with a photograph, and usually these would be a quote from the abuser that was meant to placate the survivor. These were very intense, very dramatic, really beautifully made, and intense pieces to look at. This was a piece that was made shortly after 9/11, 2001, by a student of mine. She collaborated with a friend of hers who was a Muslim American. He was from Saudi Arabia, I believe. And she made this American flag. On the flag, if you look closer, I'll zoom in for you. Oops, it's not going to let me zoom in too much, sorry. There are two layers of images. The layers of red are him dressed in what is considered like a terrorist, quote unquote, costume. And the ones on the white strip are snapshots from his snapshot collection of his family, his friends, of just his daily life. So a very powerful piece, very big. She ironed on those images and then sewed this together. It was quite a dramatic project. This is a very ambitious piece by a student of mine. He actually continued this, and I believe in the end he had about 7 or 8 of these pieces. He started it in one class, and he would get old working televisions, very old working televisions, and he would actually in the darkroom he would put these images onto the screen, and these were images of people that he knew who were screaming, so that when you saw this in person, he would turn on the TV so they were giving that horrible static noise, and you would see the image of the screaming people. They were really quite amazing. This was a cubist inspired portrait that one of my students did. And this was a student who really thought of himself as a commercial artist, but he ended up doing a number of fine art classes. So he printed these, he printed the photos, several photos, he glued them onto poster board, cut them out, and made this very tangible, sort of cubist textual portrait. Little David Hockney in there too. This was an amazing thing. This was actually a final project. This student took an old portrait of her mother and recreated it entirely out of matches. So the black ones are burned, and the white ones are unburned. It was about 2,000 or 3,000 matches. I think it took her a week. I can't remember how long. It was really a beautiful project, really intriguing. Oh, I was debating putting these in, but I think I like them because, especially for those of you, like all of us, as we're sheltering at home, this is something you could consider. This is a collage project. She was a landscape photographer, and she took some of her old landscape photos and reconfigured them into these imaginary landscapes. So this is another possibility for you. Rather than having to take new photos, you could use some of your photos that exist and reconfigure them in a way. These are, unfortunately, like I said, I photographed these on the wall with probably my really bad old point and shoot camera, so forgive the not so great pictures. Oh, this student was really inspired by the photo montage artist. She grabbed a bunch of old National Geographics and she made these photo montages just with cut and paste. Again, another idea for those of us sheltering at home. I wish I had a video of this. So this is a very ambitious project, probably way beyond what I would expect you to do in terms of this assignment, maybe for a final. And I believe she did do this for her final. So these are all photographs. She printed the photographs and she then created them into pinwheels. So you can actually twist and turn. So there's 2 photographs per tile. I always have a hard time explaining this. And the pinwheels allow you to twist and turn and mix them together, or to go the opposite way and separate them. They were really, really quite incredible. I like this series, and I thought of this. I wanted to keep this included because of our current situation. These two students worked collaboratively. They covered an entire apartment with plastic and photographed it. So it has a lot to do with that idea of protection and cloistering and personal space. This is an artist from Solano. She actually did a series of staged versions of different kinds of mental illnesses. This is addiction. This is just to give you an idea. I'm sorry, this is a little pixelated. This is just to give you an idea. You can do something far more traditional. This student chose to do depictions of bridges, and he just did this beautiful series of photographs of local bridges with his own style. Now, you might or might not be able to get out to do these right now, although these are all out in open spaces. You can socially distance. This was a very personal series or book project by a student who had a very challenging relationship with her daughter. This is called Bad Mother, and it's a book that actually has 2 sides to it, which are images and text, which talk about the challenges of being in a contentious relationship with a child, or feeling like a bad mother. This was a very personal series. This student really wanted to be a bride. And so she owned a wedding dress, and she photographed herself in various locations with that wedding dress. This student was home with a concussion when she was supposed to be doing this assignment, or when she was assigned this assignment. And so she made all of these really from her home as she sheltered, as we are now. She was sheltering in place, recovering from a concussion. So this was about her experience of having that concussion. And by the way, I'm not necessarily showing all of the photos in a given series just for the sake of expediency. This is another found photo project. This student was inspired by something he saw online and did his own version of this. He saw it in another gallery, that is. And so these are all images that he found on the internet and montaged together in Photoshop. This student was preparing to get married, and she came from a very traditional Hindu family, and she was going to have this traditional ceremony to please her family, but she had many mixed feelings about it, and so she made a collage with photos both lifted from media, but also some of her own photos, talking about that conflicted feeling about the traditions of the for women and the relationship to money in this ceremony. And this student made a series about nudity and sexuality. He is transgender. And so, one of the things that I personally really appreciated about these photos was the sense um, of gender neutrality, of being in this place that had nothing to do with gender, but simply with skin and with intimacy. Oh, I love this. This is one of our recent graduates. He did a very simple series of self portraits with a mirror. Inspired by Lee Friedlander. This student was inspired by the abstract photos of Aaron Siskin, and he did his own color version with objects in his garage. Another thing that would be very doable while sheltering in place. And this is, I have two examples of this. This is a scanograph. I'm going to do, hopefully if I can get it set up, I'll do a little scanography demonstration. I might actually just describe it, but if you have a scanner at home or can get access to a scanner, you can make these really crazy scanography photographs, both by just laying objects still onto the scanner, which I'll show you in a second, but also in this case, these were kumquats that came from that tree that's outside of the building that are just being dragged across the scanner to create this kind of imaginative um, image. Here's another one that was even more so. And I'll come to another scanography image later. This photographer was actually really interested more in food photography and product photography. So for her fine art project, she actually combined some of those skills. She really loved doing the product and doing lighting, was very talented with it. She combined that with a concept about food and about her current relationship with food. She was at the time on dialysis and waiting for a kidney transplant, and so food was something that she didn't get to enjoy. So she made this about the sort of the loss of food in her life. So although they look very clean and pristine, they really are about emptiness. And I'd like to say that she since has received a kidney transplant, is doing really, really well. So there's a happy ending to that. Some more scanography. This is a self-portrait scanography. By the way, I don't quite recommend this. You need to be very careful. If you're going to scan your own face, you should probably keep your eyes closed. That said, these were quite amazing. She actually did her final project in this class, which I don't have in here, was food that she laid on the scanner. I have one of those in my office if we're ever back there. This is a series. You'll have to see if you can guess who this photographer is. You probably know him. And these are all little tiny, simple constructions of white paper that is sitting in milk in the studio. Very, very tiny. I don't know if he used hot lights or strobes. This is something you could absolutely do with a speed light or even just with hot lamps because it is a still life. The student, I forgot this one was in here. I put this out of order. This is about self-perceptions, about looking in the mirror and about trying to resolve your own sense of pressure about beauty. About the body. Moving series. Very simple architectural project. This was taken in that beautiful building in the center of Benicia. I love the simplicity of these and the way that they captured both the elegance of this building, but also its ordinary quality. And these are photoshopped landscapes. This is done with, actually, if you haven't done Photoshop, I won't describe it. If you're interested in how this was done, you can email me and I could talk to you about it. This is by an artist who has since moved to Oregon, hangs out with mountains all the time. These are quite elegant. And these last are also manipulated, I think possibly just in Lightroom, but possibly in Photoshop. And these are depictions of the primary and secondary colors using natural forms that are reimagined and reconfigured. Pine cones. And I think that is it. I hope that was inspiring. Be sure to ask me if you want any more ideas or information. We'll be talking a lot about the project in the discussions to come.